So for the player to speak out about, I've got a problem with my parent, taking advantage of me financially or abusing me or whatever. I mean,
And that happens.
There are some horror stories out there. They're well documented. But yes, I think if I'd had daughters, for sure, I would have been there every step of the way if I could have afforded to do that. And I think if I hadn't, I may have advised them to go in a different direction.
Right, Judy Murray is here. Hello, Judy. How are you?
Hello, I'm absolutely fine, thank you.
Great. Now, I always think you don't really need an introduction, but here's a quick one. Tennis player, coach, of course, mother of him, strictly contestant, and now author. I mean, you've written your memoir, but now this is fiction, and it is called The Wild Card. Now, I was saying to Fee earlier that I just swallowed this in a couple of gulps because it took me on a proper tennis journey. And I just want to say to people that it starts, we're sort of halfway through Wimbledon, and we're with a 36-year-old British player, Abigail Patterson, who is having the time of her life. She's made this sensational comeback, and somehow she's got through to the second week of Wimbledon. Now, would this actually be possible? Could you take a massive break from the professional game and then come back and have an incredible run like that?
I think it would be very difficult if you'd taken a break and not come near the game at all. But what she did after she was forced to retire as one of the most promising prospects in Britain at 17 was that she initially became a hitting partner for another coach and worked with a lot of other good young players in a paid capacity, and then learned how to coach. So stayed in the game and mentored a lot of top junior players. So she was always involved in tennis, just out of the picture in terms of the main frame. And I think that what you see now in tennis is many more of the top players staying around the top of the game because of all the advances in sports science and sports medicine. They travel with physios, they travel with fitness trainers, they keep themselves in great shape. So you see Serena still competing at 40, Venus still competing at 42, 43, Roger 40, still up there and contending. So in that sense, it is possible. And it is very much a tale of you're never too old to follow your dreams.
Well, that's why people are going to love the book, Judy. I won't give away the end, but she has a secret which she has to basically keep on the down low, and it all comes to the surface. And I don't want to ruin anybody's enjoyment, but you'll be smiling at the end, won't you? That's the point. It's not a sad thing, so that's great. But there are some difficult aspects to the story you tell here, and I just wonder whether you were considering writing about all this stuff before. I'm talking particularly about player-coach relationships, because they're tricky. They can be extremely difficult, can't they?
Yeah, I definitely saw an opportunity to raise awareness of some of the challenges and issues that exist for women and girls in sport, not just in tennis. And one of those, of course, is abuse of power, abuse of trust. And I think that when I was the Fed Cup captain, the British women's team, and I spent about 6 years on the women's tour with our girls. And the first thing that I learned was how much harder you have to work to make things happen on the women's side of the game than on the men's. And the second thing was that there's hardly any female coaches on the women's circuit. It's dominated by male coaches. And when I first encountered that, when I walked into my first player lounge and I went, wow, where's the female coaches? They didn't exist. And that made me think, what do these young female players do when they have a problem, whether that's physical, financial, anxiety over something, emotional issues, menstrual cycle, the pill, all of these things. Who do you go to talk to in confidence?
Who did they go?
Well, actually, what the WTA did, that's the women's tour, they started to recognise that there needed to be an outlet for women to go to in confidence. And they brought in a few, they were called lifestyle managers, older women who understood the tennis circuit and were there, who you could go to in confidence, who would listen, advise, and who could act where they needed to. Because if you think about it, you're a young female player, you're travelling around the world with usually a very much older guy or male team around you, and you're the employer. And it's how do you learn how to be an employer when you're like late teens?
Yeah.
And unless you're in the luxury position of being able to afford to have a parent or parents or brother or sister to travel with you, you're out there on your own, and you are in that sense very vulnerable.
You obviously have two highly successful tennis playing sons. If you'd had daughters, would you have been actually happy for them to do that for a living, or would you have been concerned?
You know, I've been asked that a few times, and, you know, for sure, for all that I went with my kids when they were in their later teens in order to help them, you need to have somebody around you that you can trust, who's there for you to give you the emotional support, who has your best long-term interests at heart. And not everybody has that. A lot of people see the fame and fortune, but not, you know, and you, generally speaking, can rely on family for that. And a lot of parents do travel, and a lot of parents assume the role of the coach, but that it doesn't always work out. So for the player to speak out about, I've got a problem with my parent, you know, taking advantage of me financially or abusing me or whatever. I mean,
And that happens.
there are some horror stories out there. They're well documented. But yes, I think if I'd had daughters, for sure, I would have been there every step of the way if I could have afforded to do that. And I think if I hadn't, I may have advised them to go in a different direction.
Right, okay, well, that's telling in itself, I guess. Fee and I were talking the other day, actually, after we saw the pictures of Emma Raducanu sitting up in bed, looking happier than I've ever seen her after surgery. Now, I'm not undermining the seriousness of the surgery she's been through, but it really struck us both, didn't it, that we'd never seen her look so joyful.
She looked really positively relieved and comfortable, and so often the pictures that you see of her, she's been looking quite distressed recently. I mean, even if she's had a good day on court, she's looked unhappy. Is she a person, and I know it's difficult for you to comment on a specific person, but is that the kind of concern that you're referring to, that we might actually all be witnessing in plain sight actually at the moment?
Yeah, I think for, you know, most young girls of her age would be students, and they would be studying, enjoying themselves, boyfriends, great social calendar and so forth. And, you know, she was catapulted into superstardom really when she won US Open. An incredible achievement, but completely unexpected. And what it did, you know, obviously it put her into the public eye hugely. It also catapulted her ranking to a place that normally she would have taken several stepping stones to get there. And on those stepping stones, she would have learned along the way about the life and business of becoming a professional player. And she didn't have that luxury. So she really had a baptism of fire. And she's gone through a number of coaches. I think, you know, probably having this time off after the surgeries will hopefully give her time to consider the long-term strategy from here. Who does she want in her corner? Who's going to advise her? Who's got her best interests at heart for the long term? And where's she going to have her fun? I mean, when Andy was 18 and he started off on the men's tour, and we were able to afford a coach for the first time in Mark Petchey. And I recognised it is stressful in a one-on-one situation, not just for the player, it's actually stressful for the coach as well. If you're 24/7 with a young player, you don't just assume the role of the coach. You're part parent, you're part friend, you're all sorts of things. And the coach needs a bit of downtime as well. And so from time to time, I would send one of Andy's pals with him for a couple of weeks, you know, one of his tennis pals or one of his school pals, to break it up for him and to break it up for the coach. And that was really just my common sense telling me he needs to have a bit of normality in his life. He needs somebody to go go-karting with and out to the cinema, not the same older coach every night for lunch, dinner, breakfast.
And has he ever said to you or Jamie that actually they recognise some part of all of the problems that we face in adult life might be to do with not having had quite such a normal adolescence?
I think with boys, I would say that what I saw more in boys' tennis and on the men's circuit, the men in general, I think they tend to mix with each other much more. They've always got football or baseball or basketball in common. They still have all these fantasy football and basketball leagues among players. You see that kind of gang of friends going out for dinner more, going to do things together. You don't see it so much in the girls. I think they're more protective of their own space. They tend to see the others as being their competitors and so forth. So you do become reliant on that group or person that is around you. And that's why, you know, I've been really happy to see the WTA bringing in a head of safeguarding, bringing in these lifestyle managers, which for me, especially with all the mental health challenges that we've had post-COVID, and the hassle with social media and the media, I think these people are every bit as important as the physios who look after the bodies that are provided for by the tour. We've also seen things like the LTAR, that's the governing body in Britain of tennis. They are advertising at the moment for a young person's welfare manager, and I'm thinking, that's great, because that means if somebody sees or hears or experiences something, there is somebody that they can go to where they can report things. Because for so many years, who do you go to? You're ashamed, you're embarrassed, you're anxious, you're frightened. Who do you go to that will listen to you and will act on what you say, i.e., believe you, and do something about it, rather than, I don't know how to deal with this, I'll just brush it under the carpet and hope it goes away. So, I think through the book I've got the whole thing of speak up if you can't, but who do you speak to?
So that's always been the problem in the past.
Yep.
Judy, thank you. We'll be back to you in a moment or two. You're listening to Judy Murray talking to Garvey and Glover on Times Radio.